Today is July 19th, 2005. My name is Catherine Fuller Carter, and I'm here interviewing my dad, Donald Fuller. Dad, tell me your birth date and where you were born.
My birthday is 6/29/31, and I was born in Carmichael's, PA.
And from what I know about the family, your parents and your grandparents were both farmers, so you grew up on a farm. And as you got older, you probably helped out with some of the chores on the farm. What were some of the chores that you did as a young boy?
Well, when I was in high school, I was milking about 9 cows by hand before I went to school and after I came home from school. Plus, we had other chores to do, like feeding the young calves and other livestock that was on the farm. The sheep were fed. There was hay to be thrown over the fence from the haystacks, which we will talk about in the future.
Well, tell me about the haystacks. This was before tractors, and you had to put up hay. Tell me how you did that, how you built the haystacks.
Well, of course, first you had to cut the hay, which was cut with horses and a mowing machine. The mowing machine had a sickle bar on it, which cut the hay, and you in turn let the hay dry for a day or 2 days, whatever time it took to get the moisture out of it. After that, you took the horses and attached them to what we called a dump rake, and this dump rake, we pulled it through the field. It would pick up the hay, and after it got full, it had a way you dumped it, and then you kept going till you raked the whole field. Someone was, and other people were behind you shocking it. It was done by horse. You rode the horse, and you had a rope attached to what we call a single tree behind the horse. You wrapped that rope around the shock, and you pulled the shocks to the stack where there were, most of the time there were 2 men there to throw the hay up on top of this pile, bigger pile. Also the stack was built around a pole. You set a wooden pole in the ground to stabilize this stack so it wouldn't fall over so easy. You kept hauling shocks into it till you got the stack built up to approximately 15 to 20 feet in the air.
Wow.
One man worked just on top of the stack to place the hay after it was stolen up to him to make it. He's the one that made the shape of the pear.
Well, when you had these haystacks out in the field, how did you separate the hay in the wintertime to take it to feed the animals?
We had what we call a hay knife. It was a piece of steel with 2 handles on it, and you just cut it like a pie. Cut pieces out of the stack like a pie. That reason for cutting it down like that was to keep part of it weatherproof. Just cut a section at a time, and that way you didn't have the whole stack exposed to the weather, which would cause it to spoil.
Was that very hard to cut those stacks in the wintertime?
It's pretty hard for a little guy.
Did you ever store hay in any of the barns on the farm?
All farms back in the early days were built 2 stories, or biggest percentage of them were 2-story barns, especially where the livestock was kept. And The upper story was for hay storage. That entailed hauling the hay by wagon from a field. From these windrows that we had made earlier, you could pick it up by the windrows, or they even shocked it before they loaded it on the wagon. But there was times when they just picked it out, threw it from the windrow up onto the wagon, hauled it into the barn, which was had a piece of equipment we called the hay fork, and there was a track right in the peak of the barn that this fork ran on, and you pulled it by, well, if it was up in the barn, you had to pull it by hand out of the barn, out this track, and it would trip and come down, and you'd get a load of hay, stick it in the hay, and that would pick up a load which you pulled up with a horse and with rope and pulley, pulled the fork up into the barn.
Tell me about the difference it made putting up hay when your family got the first tractor.
But the tractor is much faster, and in a short time after tractors came, why balers came into play. I can remember the first baler I remember, it took 3 men to operate it. And one man to drive the tractor, and 2 men rode the baler, and they used wire to hold the bales together. So these men one man had to stick the wires through the one side of the baler, and the other fellow, the man on the opposite side, had to tie these wires together. So when the bale left the baler, it would stay intact. A few years after that, they came out with a smaller baler, and it automatically tied the bales, and it only took one person to operate all the equipment. And some of those balers had what they called kickers on them, and these kickers, when the bale hay left the baler, hit this kicker, and it threw it up into the wagon.
Tell me about what you did on rainy days sometimes as part of your chores.
On rainy days when it was too wet, or days when it was too wet to do any harvesting or any chores, making hay or anything like that, we had what we call a saws, which consisted of a steel bar attached to a long handle, and we would go out and cut along the fence rows, keep the weeds and the grass that grew along the fence row, which we were unable to cut with the mowing machine. We had to cut that by hand to keep the fence rows clean and the farm looking much neater.
So no days off on the farm?
If there were, I didn't see too many of them.
Wow, I really learned a lot today. Is there anything else that you can think of that you'd like to add about living on a farm or growing up on a farm?
I guess I probably could say you couldn't put a monetary value on it, on the experience and the things that you were taught. It was a good experience for sure, something that you don't forget, never forget. There was hard at times, but there's also many good times.
I would agree. Well, thank you very much, Dad.
You're welcome.